As you watch this video on Matthew Malloy, remember that he never received training in his powers or fully grasped the extent of his abilities. You have to wonder about the heights he might have reached with his extra-dimensional powers if he had achieved the level of reality-warping mastery seen in Molecule Man or Franklin Richards. Matthew Malloy's story opens in Charleston, South Carolina, where a flashback shows him arguing with his wife over their expectations for their bed and breakfast getaway. In the midst of their heated exchange, Matthew sees his wife obliterated by an energy beam from a Skrull ship. This tragic event took place during a Skrull assault. As he looks around, he witnesses the complete ruin of the bed and breakfast they were staying in, demolished by a crashing ship. Suddenly, he is confronted by a Skrull operative about to kill him. However, a nearby SHIELD helicarrier intervenes, targeting and eliminating the Skrull. As Matthew absorbs the chaotic scene, a broadcast from SHIELD Command declares a national emergency due to the Skrull invasion. They advise people to stay indoors and trust no one. 1 year later, Matthew relocates to Newberry, South Carolina, and encounters his ex-sister-in-law, Alana. Still haunted by the horrific loss of his wife, she comforts him, affirming that despite her sister's absence, she still views him as family. Even with her attempts to console him, his grief is reignited, pushing him to an emotional brink. At that moment, his latent mutant powers surge uncontrollably. A violent discharge of energy erupts, leveling the surrounding area and leaving him in the center of a vast crater. Tragically, this blast also claims Alana's life. He remains standing, overwhelmed by grief and disbelief over his actions. Looking down at his hand, he ponders the recent events and his newfound abilities while assessing the extensive damage around him. As he stands in the crater, he experiments with his powers on a nearby can of food to no effect, leaving him puzzled about the nature of his abilities. Suddenly, a robotic drone bearing a holographic image of SHIELD Director Maria Hill approaches him, inquiring if he caused the destruction. She proceeds to ask if he possesses any special powers or if he is a mutant. She continues her probing as she inquires whether he has ever caused similar incidents before. Matthew, uncertain of what occurred, is horrified at the realization that he has caused fatalities. With his powers now active but uncontrolled, Matthew is pushed to the brink of emotional collapse. The more Maria attempts to soothe him, the more agitated he becomes. Maria dispatches a strike team to his location, but in his distress, he unleashes his powers again, decimating everyone nearby. We move forward to the point where Charles reads his last will, announcing to the X-Men that there exists a mutant of such immense power that it endangers their existence and any hope of peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants. He elaborates on why Cerebro was developed and how it detected a mutant signal so potent he initially thought Cerebro was malfunctioning or that he had operated it incorrectly. He describes it as the most significant mutant power signature Cerebro had ever recorded. His initial excitement and optimism were quickly overshadowed by the fear of this mutant falling under the influence of someone like Magneto or Apocalypse. Charles recounts his visit to this extraordinarily powerful mutant, only to discover that the mutant was surprisingly a mere 8-year-old. We see Matthew playing beside a crumbling sidewalk next to a dilapidated fence. Charles introduces himself to Matthew, who shows little interest in engaging with a stranger while he orchestrates a battle between his toy monsters. As Matthew sets up his toy soldiers for a mock battle, Charles cautions him to be careful. However, Charles's warning came too late as Matthew's powers were inadvertently released, wreaking further havoc around them. Charles remarks that without his own mutant abilities, he would have died instantly. He continues, noting his inability to penetrate the boy's mind to halt the turmoil. Each attempt was met with a violent burst of Matthew's destructive abilities. Charles admits that dealing with Matthew was the toughest ordeal he had faced, especially considering the boy's young age and unmanageable powers. He shares with the X-Men his concerns about the potential repercussions if humanity discovered the existence of such a dangerously uncontrollable mutant. The prospects for peaceful coexistence would likely be destroyed. He reveals his initial thoughts of taking Matthew's life, viewing him as an aberration rather than a representative of mutant kind. Yet, he refrained, fearing that any attack on the boy might provoke an even greater display of his powers, leading to further devastation and loss of life, a burden Charles believed he could not bear. Thus, Charles opts to approach Matthew using a youthful avatar, pretending to be a visitor at the neighbor's house. Charles's avatar, named Charlie, initiates contact with Matthew by offering him fries and showing him some unique toys from Japan, easing into a conversation about Matthew's family and home situation. During their interaction, Matthew again clashes his toys together, triggering another intense surge of energy, knocking Charlie backwards. Matthew quickly checks on Charlie, who implores him not to repeat that action. He also questions Matthew about whether he triggers these powerful energy outbursts with his thoughts, to which Matthew replies that he is unsure. Charlie then inquires why everything around is in disarray, and whether his parents are aware of the destruction. Matthew somberly suggests that his outburst might have led to his parents' disappearance, as they vanished when they were scolding him. He hoped they would return, but they never did. Matthew confides in Charlie that he feels lost and unsure about his situation, emphasizing that he doesn't want to cause any more harm. Charlie suggests that he might be a mutant. Charles then informs the X-Men that he installed psychic barriers in Matthew's mind to inhibit his access to his powers and erased all memories of the deaths he caused and the destruction he wrought. He also placed Matthew in an orphanage and concealed his mutant identity. He explains that he was unable to suppress the boy's extraordinary abilities, which were unlike any he had encountered before. He chose not to hand Matthew over to S.H.I.E.L.D. or the Avengers, distrusting their intentions and fearing they would incarcerate him. A sentiment confirmed by reading their minds. Charles has since kept a vigilant watch over Matthew, checking on him daily and visiting him annually, verifying that the psychic blocks remain effective. He reveals that during one visit, Matthew discovered that Charlie was merely an avatar, a figment created in his mind. During that encounter, Charles then sheds the illusion and clarifies to Matthew the reasons behind his actions, also suggesting that Matthew's devastating powers might originate from another dimension, highlighting his significant mutant strength. Matthew becomes distressed upon realizing he was responsible for his parents' deaths, a fact Charles confirms. He then queries if he had harmed Charles, who reassures him that he hadn't. He inquires whether he has harmed others and pleads with Charles to remove his powers. Charles and Matthew understand that action cannot be done without killing Matthew, which Charles states he cannot do. Matthew requests that Charles re-establish the measures to erase his memories of his actions and his powers. Charles obliges, setting up robust psychic barriers and memory suppression to enable Matthew to lead a normal life. Charles's final instruction is for Scott and Rachel Summers to monitor Matthew and ensure the psychic blocks are maintained. He cautions them that interacting with Matthew should be avoided due to his immense powers. Next, we see Maria watching Matthew from afar, reflecting on Nick Fury's dire warning about a mutant possessing divine power, unaware of its origin or purpose, whose mere hiccup results in the deaths of thousands. Maria commands a complete evacuation of South Carolina, determined to prevent further casualties today. We then see Matthew still positioned in the crater where he previously annihilated a S.H.I.E.L.D. strike team. He tries to use his abilities to resurrect the fallen S.H.I.E.L.D. team members. To his astonishment, it begins to work. Skeletal remains reassemble and start moving toward him. Meanwhile, S.H.I.E.L.D. brings in Exodus and Headlock to take any necessary actions to neutralize Matthew. Exodus declares their intent to jointly connect with Matthew. As they attempt to probe his mind, Matthew detects them and cautions them to stop. However, they continue with their mental probing, and Matthew reacts, causing the violent deaths of both Exodus and Headlock. Realizing Matthew's mutant status, Maria decides it's time to involve the X-Men. Elsewhere, Beast is at Cerebro, endeavoring to locate Matthew's precise position. As Beast is taken aback by his findings, he starts to inform the X-Men, just as Maria reaches out to them seeking assistance. Following this, Beast completes his update, alerting the X-Men that Matthew has awoken, is beyond Omega level, and exhibits a mutant power signature unprecedented in their records. He ominously advises that their next encounter with Matthew might be their last. Next, we see the X-Men monitoring Matthew from aboard the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. They observe him skillfully experimenting with his emerging abilities. The X-Men deliberate on how to best engage with Matthew, with Beast strongly opposing a direct interaction. Beast argues that given Matthew's recent emergence from Xavier's psychic blocks and the unauthorized alteration of his mind and body by powers that remain a mystery and uncontrollable, a direct confrontation would be unwise. As Matthew further experiments with his abilities, Rachel attempts to intimidate him into compliance using her psychic powers. She conjures an image of the superheroes arrayed before him, with Charles at the forefront, pleading to reinstate the psychic blocks in Matthew's mind. While Rachel maintains her psychic portrayal of Charles, Matthew questions why his powers should be suppressed. He contends that his abilities surpass those of any superhero and suggests there might be a justifiable reason for possessing them. Matthew soon realizes the deception and discovers that Charles is deceased. He then channels his powers to cause the helicarrier to plummet. As the helicarrier descends rapidly, Matthew utters, "X-Men." Amidst dismantling the helicarrier, he addresses the X-Men by saying, "I don't blame you for attacking me. I don't blame you for disrespecting me. Charles Xavier lied to you as he lied to me. I wish you could feel what I feel, but I'm not mad at you." It seems he managed to extract the X-Men from the aircraft just before its collision with the ground. He dispatched Cyclops to a location where his students would later find him. Rachel and Storm found themselves back at the Jean Grey School, with Beast intrigued by their apparent exemption from harm. At the crash site, Maria issues a decisive command for everyone to stand down as Matthew watches. She then demands that Matthew leave their planet at once. Scott arrives and informs Matthew that his perspective on him differs greatly from that of Charles. He then invites Matthew to discuss their issues over breakfast, an offer Matthew accepts. Maria watches in frustration as magic teleports Matthew and Scott to another location, known as Devil's Tower. Scott earnestly requests that Matthew delve into his mind to understand Scott's identity, his background, and its relevance to Matthew's predicament. Through this connection, Matthew learns about Charles's influence on Scott, the origins of the X-Men, their purpose, and Scott's belief that humans will perpetually despise mutants despite their sacrifices. Scott declares to Matthew that it is time for mutants to assert their rightful position. Uncertain of the role Scott envisions for him, Matthew starts to feel overwhelmed. As memories of his actions resurface, including those where he caused fatalities, Matthew expresses despair, feeling beyond help. Scott attempts to comfort him, promising to aid him in using his powers to save lives, but Matthew remains skeptical. Scott encourages Matthew to probe his mind and discover other mutants who have faced similar dilemmas, possessing vast powers that could be used for good or evil. Can you name each of the mutants in this image? Matthew begins to lose control over his powers, prompting Scott to call on magic for assistance. As the mountain starts to disintegrate, magic quickly teleports Scott to safety. Watching Matthew sculpt the mountain into various forms, Scott asserts to magic his belief that Matthew can still be redeemed. Magic then brings Scott back to Matthew, assuring him that they will not abandon him and will help him harness his powers by providing training, focus, and purpose. Magneto arrives and confronts Cyclops, accusing him of pushing his agenda too far. Meanwhile, Illyana Rasputin consults with Dr. Strange, briefing him about a mutant who controls time and space, life and death, yet cannot manage his power. After discussing strategies, Dr. Strange entrusts her with the Eye of Agamotto. Returning to the confrontation between Magneto, Cyclops, and Matthew, Magneto justifies his actions and challenges Cyclops' claims that he wishes to dominate Matthew. Upon hearing about Magneto's actions against Charles, Matthew reacts by teleporting Magneto to the Jean Grey School against his wishes. Later, Beast reveals that the government and the Avengers are planning an offensive against Matthew in response to his actions involving the helicarrier. Matthew confides in Scott that he feels out of place everywhere. He is aware of his lethal potential, even accidentally, and wishes to avoid causing further harm. He expresses gratitude for Scott's support. Illyana then arrives with the Eye of Agamotto, which will reveal Matthew's full capabilities to him and the others. However, just as Matthew prepares to peer into the eye, S.H.I.E.L.D. launches an airstrike that devastates the area, killing Matthew, Cyclops, and Magic. Back in time, Tempest arrives at Xavier's school for gifted youngsters, with a strategy for Charles to rectify the situation. Meanwhile, S.H.I.E.L.D. confirms visually and identifies that Matthew, Cyclops, and Magic have been killed. An agent reports that all organic life in the vicinity has been extinguished. Yet Matthew starts to regenerate, questioning the agents if they had just attempted to eliminate him. The agents fire at Matthew once more, obliterating him in the process. Matthew, however, resurrects himself yet again. In response, he annihilates the agents and all helicarriers nearby. He then attempts to resurrect Cyclops and Magic, but fails this time. Acknowledging Scott's genuine efforts to assist him, he swears vengeance. Back at the Jean Grey School, Emma receives the tragic news of Scott and Magic's deaths, prompting her to release a psychic wave that affects the other students. When Matthew materializes before Emma, she questions whether he witnessed Scott's death. In response to her question, she strikes him in the face, and he retaliates with an energy blast that kills Emma. Aware of the devastation to come, Rachel broadcasts a message to all students, instructing them to seek refuge in the underground tunnels for their safety. Matthew declares that he did not intend to kill Emma, and that he had come to the school seeking assistance. However, Storm is convinced that he is responsible for the deaths of Emma, Scott, Magic, and Illyana. The X-Men and their students, led by Storm, aggressively converge on Matthew. He cautions them about his uncontrollable powers and their slim chances of overpowering him. In a devastating move, Matthew releases his power in a single energy blast, obliterating the entire vicinity, annihilating the X-Men and their students. In a twist of fate, Tempest successfully persuades Charles to prevent Matthew's eventual parents from meeting, ensuring they never do, and consequently, Matthew is never born. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more comic-related content. Thank you.